All right, Daniel and Timmy, I mean, gosh, there's so many questions I want to ask you both. I guess I'll start with, the shared connection, the obvious shared connection that I see between both of your work is how you think about merging the physical and digital. And I'm super curious about how you take the first step when you're starting a new project. What is the first step that you take, or maybe the first question that you ask to bridge the gap between a dream into reality? So I'd love for each of you to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, first question I would ask would be, what if? That's also like how you navigate and build a world with world building. You ask what if questions, right? And when I try to have this intersection between technology or like digital space, VR, with the physical world, is of course you work with senses. And my practice is like, how do I avoid cognitive dissonance? Because that's when you're snapping back to reality. When something feels odd, not really, realistic. So for instance, if you play a shooter game like Half-Life in VR, you can touch and interact with every object, but if you touch a plant and the plant doesn't react to your touch, you have cognitive dissonance because it doesn't, react to the way you expected, like your schema. So that's how I try to build digital content with lowest cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to say something kind of similar in that our approach is to ask the question, why are we doing what we're doing? And what is the right way to deliver that conceptually to the people with, in our case, not cognitive dissonance, because perhaps we're doing more physical things, but the cognitive dissonance is in interaction. If something is by its nature made to be interactive, then everything that people do once they realize that is try play first before trying to absorb why. And so for me, interaction is actually an introduction to a disconnection from an intent. And when you're creating physical, tangible experiences, if you're making it interactive, there has to be a really clear reason why. And then you find ways to hide the technology so that it just feels natural. I think to that point, waving a hand at a thing to see something respond, I mean, that's not a natural. You wave to say hello and goodbye to people, but that's, oh look, it explodes when I move. There needs to be a reasoning behind that journey, or people will forget the reason they're there for that journey. So, and that's, I guess, that's the way we would approach it.
I'd love to chat more about that. So one thing that I really resonated with your talk, Daniel, in particular, was the idea of play. And the fact that I would argue a lot of us have kind of lost the ability to play. Perhaps it happens naturally as we age, but there's also something else going on, right? I mean, I feel like for myself as a designer and writer, a lot of my days are spent, honestly, online. I feel like I live online. I talk to people online. I'm on a screen all day. How beautiful it is to actually be here in person at Unfinished, where everything feels so much more tangible than that. So what do you do to sort of help your clients, help your teammates, connect back to play themselves, or maybe help yourself connect back to a sense of play so that you can create, something that can live on to its fullest potential?
Oof, that is a great question, and I don't know if I have an answer in my head, but is it what we do in practice is what I'm asking myself. So there have been moments where we would be intentionally playful in our studio, where we bring gaming into our afternoons. But we've also lost that because the ebb and flow of the way that business tends to evolve, it brings and takes away those moments, the space to have those moments. I'm so busy, there's no way I can go and have lunch in the park together with my team. Oh, I'm so busy, I have to stare at this email for the next 4 or 5 hours. So the work, the kind of cadence of work, which is very sine wavy in reality, means that you need to be, and by the way, you should be kind to yourself. Don't put that pressure of expectation. Oh, we need to play every day or otherwise we're failing at our task. No, you need to allow yourself to be kind to both yourself and your team to go through those intense moments of maybe total separation and isolation. But then when you're out of them, to remember that there are these other people around, there are these other opportunities. The last thing I'll say about that is we do a lot of R&D. I'm sure you do a lot too, as I've seen. And R&D is one of the most playful things that we get to do in our studio. It's where we all get to kind of let the creative juices flow. It's where we all get to say, oh, what if we could just do this now? And what about if we tweak it in that way? And what happens if I grab it in mid-motion? Oh, I broke it. But that willingness to totally break the thing by mistake and just rebuild it, I think is definitely where play most impacts the studio and the team.
Absolutely. So Timmy, I would love to ask you a little bit about your experience. You had mentioned earlier in your talk that you had actually experienced homelessness. And I'm curious how that experience maybe has impacted your approach to your work today.
That's a good question. I was homeless a lot of times during my journey. I think I adopted that lifestyle actually. A bit painful, to be honest, because I'm always searching for a home. Like, even if I have a home, I'm always on the road, meeting interesting people, but that comes with a cost. But what I saw, it's like it increased my appetite to risk, because I know I can be worse than that. So I'm always going all in. Like, after selling the company to Meta, I went all in NVIDIA and Unity. Then, when that was going down with the dawn of the metaverse, I was like going all in the AI space. So it helped me build resilience. And just the capacity to, as I said, like risk and build certain strength. And I believe in seasons a lot. So I know there is a seasonality to everything. I'll probably find my home one day. But yeah, I think all the experiences I did after was for that reason. Like, how do I build those safe spaces that can become, a home? And that can be spiritually, mentally. It doesn't need to be a home with the roof and windows.
You're welcome to visit us.
All right.
Yeah, not a physical home, but a spiritual home, a home of community, right? Yeah. That brings me to my next question around prototyping for you both. So resilience, you just mentioned resilience, and I feel like resilience is a huge aspect of prototyping, because you tinker, you fail, you try, and you have to be resilient to kind of get back up and do another prototype and see what works, right? But I've noticed as a designer myself that prototyping is not often given the space, going back to space and play. In the business world, it's not often given the right space to actually try and create those prototypes. There's pressure often to, produce the final result. What's the final result going to look like? Can you just show it to me? Can you just get there, right? And so I'm super curious, how each of you go about the process of prototyping when you're facing that pressure to deliver on that final result.
Absolute confidence in an outcome. You may not know what that outcome is, but know you will get there somehow. I honestly believe sometimes one of us has to be, oh no, we're going to get this right. It may not be what we're trying to do in this very moment, but at least we'll know that this approach ain't going to work. Either way, we have to get there. I think that maybe that comes from an absolute fear of failure. I'd never want to fail. You know what I mean?
Real, yeah.
No, it's a real thing. I totally agree, and perhaps that's the core of that. But if you've done that enough times and you've been creative enough to find alternative solutions to perhaps what you had originally assumed would be the outcome, I think that really gives you this level of confidence that sometimes carries, and I'm not saying just me, but my team as well, carries the process of prototyping. I do want to say, though, very importantly, that the challenge that we actually face is more in convincing our partners to be brave enough to not know what the outcome will be. That is the actual challenge.
Can you say that again?
So the challenge is to have our partners, our clients, be brave enough, be gutsy enough to go and to commit to a process, pay for it in some cases, without knowing for certain it will be what they think it will be. That, honestly, that's been probably the biggest journey of Hirschmann Man. That's been, and I think, I love our partners for that reason, because they've given us so much faith, which is like, whoa, thanks. But we've delivered as a result because they've taken that chance. So I think we went a little off piece from your question, but I'd love to hear Timmy's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, in the lab I'm running, and also when I work outside of Volvo, I'm building a culture of being able to show unfinished things, like sketchy. So if an executive just enters the room, be prepared to show what you're working on. Doesn't need to be, the finished production or so on. And I also, it comes really close to the tool that you're using in the process, right? So there's this saying that for the reason why we're using pencils when we sketch is because it doesn't have that resolution as a Sharpie or a pen that would distract us more on the quality of the sketch rather the quality of the idea. So VR and AI sometimes helps you actually be sketchy in your prototyping works, and being able to play with it to see where it goes, experiment, not necessarily know that, okay, I'm expecting this result. And I was a big fan of Space 10. Space 10 was this amazing innovation design office from IKEA. They closed down after 10 years last year. And they had this thing called everyday experiments, where they were just doing prototypes and writing white papers about their process and inviting people for collaboration. And prototypes has this power to invite people to jump on it because it's still in progress. It invites you to jam, right? It's not a finished production. And I love that.
Just to add to that, one of the things that we found really interesting when we were communicating with our partners, our clients, was the word prototype breaks down the communication. I fully agree that that's what we're sharing all the time. But if you say in the scope of work that we're only going to be delivering a prototype, they go, oh, no, we need a finished product. This isn't acceptable. So the language is something that ended up shifting rather than the output, if you know what I mean. But I think that's also about education, which is what you clearly have been doing in your teams.
Yeah, and it also culturally, like I mentor a lot of startups and invest sometimes, and I see especially in Romania here, when you expect a prototype, people usually come with a finished product, and I'm like, dude, you spent so much money on building this, and maybe it's not the right thing to build, instead of showing work in progress that would actually help you define a clear roadmap and actually communicate to investors. Because investors, if you teach them that that's the level they should expect, now a lot of investors are like, I want to see your prototype, but they actually expected that you have 1,000 users, a lot of traction. And I think the wording and culture, it's super powerful there, and it can go really wrong if we increase the quality too much.
It certainly can, and I think if we don't really take the time and space to have a work in progress or prototype or whatever you want to call it, yeah, you end up spending more money and time in the end. It's costly to not prototype and end up, creating the wrong solution for sure. And I think we're coming to a more awareness and awakening of that in this decade. But that brings me to my last question before we open it up to the audience. So if you all have a question in mind, be thinking about it. But let's talk about trust. So you had mentioned that one of the reasons that you got into a lawsuit with Meta was over the exploitation of personalized data, and with emerging technology, or when you're showing emerging technology in a new scene, there's a lot of unease that people feel. There's a lot of unease with AI. There's a lot of mistrust with what the metaverse might be. What does this mean? What is this going to do to my reality? And so I'm super curious if there's any principles or boundaries or processes that you two do to figure out sort of what is the right level of trust or right level of trust in this relationship that we're creating between the human and the machine.
I think that's a key point on how we are running things. I was teaching the teams I was working with that to use trust as a currency, meaning that, you can help and do things for others without expecting something in return. And a lot of times being able, executives ask me, how much budget do you need? And I just need trust from you. Budgets I'll find. I'll just put it up together from different teams, or I don't want, the CEO to drop, here's some cash, because then I know I have to convince all the people downstream. So I usually say, I don't need your blessing, I just need trust. And that applies to machines as well. Since I work a lot with human-machine interaction, trust between the human and machine comes in the way we communicate things, how clear intention is. The car needs to know that the user knows that there is a moose crossing the road. The user needs to know that the car saw the moose and the car will brake if it has this autonomous things. But if that's not communicated correctly, like these human factors, and if you have a blurry icon that doesn't say much, then you're like, okay, should I brake? If I brake, maybe I'm interrupting the car's process. So I think trust in the whole thing, it's crazy important. Again, trust as a currency. Then the cybersecurity aspect, like privacy and trust. Like, do we actually trust all these companies that push certain apps and we get, interacting with them every day? And everyone talks a lot about data, but like, how valuable is that data at the end of the day? Because if you don't associate it with behavior, which builds that trust between ecosystems or big companies or government and so on, you're just, again, doing things for efficiency and losing empathy for the user or for people that matter.
I mean, I don't have a lot to add, considering we don't exactly do things with machines that would possibly kill a moose or a human by mistake without a level of trust. I will say that we build out the trust that we have is really with the partners that we have, with our customers effectively. But I'd actually say it's more with the team. So, we won't be able to create something successfully without being able to lean on each other in the right way. And that's kind of where I believe trust is most infused in what we do. Because ultimately we're creating surprise and delight moments for people. So when they come and see it, they're not like, can I trust this thing to give me a moment of smile? No, I'm smiling already. Oh no, I didn't realize. It's like, there's no exchange in that way where you have to think about, you just have a moment of surprise, and it's exciting and special for that, in that very moment. I went off-piste.
I mean, I think a common principle that I'm hearing, though, is clear communication, whether it's human-to-human relationships or human-to-machine relationships, even down to the level of an icon, right? That level of detail. That's what matters at the end of the day, and often we speed through that, and mistrust occurs when we do that. All right, well, let's open it up to the audience. So who has a question, and can we maybe get a mic that we could pass around? Awesome, yeah. Have her go first.
Hello. First of all, I will say a few words about myself to give you a context. I work for Deutsche Bank in IT Hub, and I'm a mother. First of all, I want to thank you for suing Facebook. For investing time and energy for a greater good. Because as a mother, I know technology could have negative impact. And thank you for this greater good.
Can we just do like a round of applause for that? Yeah.
I have two questions. My first question is, in a context where a lot of people have money but not creative minds, what is the secret of having an innovative, creative mind that we could stimulate our kids to have, or we could have it further? Like, what do you need to do to have more creative minds? Or is it like genetic, are you born with it, or is it something you were exposed that made you be innovative?
So, that is a great question. And obviously, as a parent, it's something that I deeply believe in. And I will say, first of all, my partner has got a talk tomorrow, which you should listen to, because she's very much interested in the space, that education around young people, and how do you kind of evolve creativity and expression. STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and maths is such an important part of the developmental process and stages of the children that we have, that you need to consider the creative alongside all those technical. And right now, most governments tend to be so focused on STEM, not STEAM. In other words, forget the art. What's creativity? But the creative industry is this incredible space of innovation, which has this rippling effect across engineering, across technology. It's really unbelievable how it impacts things. How we have approached it for our children is all I can speak to, right? Exposing them to the things that we are doing, going to art exhibitions, asking artists if we can go and visit their studios. I mean, that's a particular kind of creative expression. Taking them to, giving them opportunities for any kind of expressive exercise, even if it's not something you're confident or comfortable with. I highly, highly recommend it, because they are figuring out, their connections in their brain are all being made right now. You need to help them have every possible touch point so they can figure out who they're going to be and how they bring it all together to be the best they can be. I love that question, and I wish you luck.
And how could we do in our teams more creativity? Like, how can we stimulate this?
For me, like, creativity and fostering creativity comes with constraints. Constraints and pressure. Like, I don't believe in free, here's like infinite budget, because every time like I'm putting a blank paper in front of someone, it's like, hey, here's 2 million, tell me what you got. Because we are not exercising that thought and scenario. I do it every day. Like, for me, I'm waiting for that moment. And I've been in those moments a lot, so I know exactly what I'm gonna do. Like, if you give me a blank paper and pen, because I learned from constraints, I could see opportunity through every crack, right? And I'm thankful, for instance, for the education I got in Romania, because it taught me to be creative around things, because a lot of pressure and constraints that I had to learn, how to go around and how to actually learn and enjoy the process of learning. And in the teams, I always, come with certain deadlines or a clear brief that probably limits you in a way, you would think, but actually gives room for so much opportunity and actually creative solutions that are also valuable. Not only, post-it notes and colorful post-it notes with ideas that maybe they won't lead anywhere.
Just to add to that, I would also say that everybody should be given the right, the requirement, in fact, to share their ideas openly with one another. Good or bad, it's really important to hear from each other, because that sparks other things that come out of it. The dumbest idea in the world can be the spark that becomes the flame of another project that is amazing.
And thank you very much. My second question, and then I'll pass the mic. Because this is also about well-being, I have a more personal question. In your darkest moments, when maybe your project or your idea felt a blocker and you felt like everything was in vain, what was your belief that helped you go through it and move further?
That nothing lasts forever. That's honestly what I think at those moments.
Like, what is the belief you tell to yourself that helps you get out of those situations?
I go home and I give a hug to my children. Honestly, you remember that this is not going to kill someone, hopefully. I mean, if that's the situation, then you have other problems. But ultimately, I had this moment with a lawyer once where I was freaked out. Somebody was upset with something they did. They threatened to sue us. And the short anecdote was, she asked me, so what's the worst that can happen? And I went through this process of, okay, I guess maybe they'll sue us. Then what happens? Well, maybe my business will fail. Okay, and then what happens? I guess I'll have to reinvent myself. And then what happens? Oopsies. And then what happens? I don't know. Okay, great. I felt so much better. It still sucked to think about, but it felt better.
Thank you for the great questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but you're welcome to come up to Daniel, Timmy, myself throughout the festival and ask more questions to us. So thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Timmy.